Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a stop motion animation project out of paper. Alright, so I know I haven't been uploading a lot lately, and that's because I have been working on this huge project. It has taken me 6 months to complete this project from start to finish, so I've put a lot of time and effort into this video and everything, and it turned out pretty long, so I would really appreciate it if you would watch the whole thing all the way through and just, enjoy the process. I love animation, so I thought I would try my hand at it, and I thought it could be really cool to have my animation style look like a lightbox, but I didn't want to recreate it digitally because I'm not good at digital art and I didn't think it would turn out good. So I thought it would be best to try to actually animate it frame by frame using paper and do some stop motion animation thing. And with that in mind, I started trying to figure out what I wanted this scene to look like. There were a few places I drew from for inspiration. The first one was this lightbox that I made many months ago of a cyborg in a post-apocalyptic world traveling around on big mechanical monsters, collecting scraps and just existing. I really enjoyed making this lightbox and I thought it was a really cool concept and world, so I thought I could flesh it out a bit more. And the second main inspiration was this video I found on Instagram of a bird standing really still and then it moves and all the feathers kind of fan out on its neck and it looks really cool. And I thought it could be really cool to combine the two ideas and have a giant bird camouflaging as a tree and then opening up and coming to attack the guy. I designed the bird for quite a bit. I wasn't quite sure at first what I wanted, so I just got some sketches down. I liked the idea of having big eyes and like a thin beak. So I kept that in, I extended the neck a bit, made the body kind of round, and long thin legs. Then I quickly planned out the main composition of the scene just to make sure the whole scene will look good at every step of the way. At this point I was ready to plan out my animation in its entirety, so I spent a lot of time in the evenings figuring out the animation, figuring out all of the movement and details. But I also wanted to get started on the actual lightbox, so I started planning that out, and I knew I could do the environment because that's going to be stationary. And I was really excited to start because I decided to make this lightbox 3 times bigger than my usual work because I wanted to make sure all of the details were visible and clear and I could add a bunch of them with this much room. But I couldn't simply just start making the trees. I first had to create some frames for all of the layers. So I took down all of the measurements and here they are right here. I wrote everything down and then I just spent many days cutting out all of the necessary strips of foam board, gluing them together, widening them up by layering them, and just creating, I think, 13 frames. It took me about 5 days in total to complete, and I try to keep them really nice and clean looking. Moving on to the environment, I decided to do this big tree in the middle first because that will be the main focal point of the lightbox and it'll help space everything else out. All of the trees are made the exact same way, so I'm just going to show this one and then that's the same exact process for all of them. I start by cutting out the silhouette of a tree out of cardstock. Then I flip it over and I draw guidelines all along the back of the tree for where I want shading and other elements to be. Then I trace out shapes along those lines to create the shading for the tree. Then I cut them out and I go and glue them in their place. This adds all the shading onto the tree and just makes it look extra amazing. Then I go back and cut along all those lines to bring some light back into the piece and to highlight the tree. Then I wanted to add some little pieces of moss all around the tree, but I wanted these to pop, so I doubled up some cardstock to thicken it up and then I could stack these. So I made a bunch of them and placed them all around the tree, gluing them in place. Then to bring in some whimsical magical elements, I cut a bunch of tiny little holes all over the tree. I'm not sure what these would be exactly, but I thought it could look really cool, and I just covered the back of those holes with tracing paper so they wouldn't be see-through. And with that, I finished the first tree. It looks really cool. Look at all the different shades, and I just made like 20-30 more trees. And it took about 5 days of solid work, and at first it was pretty nice and it was pretty fun, but then I realized just how many I had to do, and there were a lot of steps for each of them, and I really started to hate it a bit, but you know, you push through and you only have to do it once, so 5 days of struggle later, I had all of my trees. The next part of the environment to make is the water, and I decided to use some tracing paper so it would be more see-through and just have some different look than the trees. And I thought of a way to make the water look like it's moving in my animation by creating really long strips of water, and then I could just slide them along to look like it's moving. And then using that first wave as reference, I created many waves going way into the far background. The only problem with making these long strips the way I do is there is a very visible seam in the middle, but I thought that I'd be okay and I'd be able to just edit that out when I'm done. And little did I know that that would become a huge pain in the butt. But for now, I continued on. When coming up with the idea for this lightbox, I had to think about a reason why this cyborg character would be out here in the river on a boat, and I thought about many different things, and then I came up with what I thought was a really great idea. And in the previous lightbox, I kind of established that he collects scraps, goes around the world collecting stuff and building things like monsters and stuff, that he could be out here searching for some materials like gears, and I thought, oh, it could be cool to add a bunch of gears in the water and little scrap metal everywhere, so I decided to just make some littering the water here and there. Then to make the world seem more overgrown, I created a bunch of like little segments of vines and moss hanging down from the ceiling that I could place around wherever I wanted to, and they could just fill in the sky a bit. Then I very carefully placed all of the gears and plants in their place. I didn't glue them in place because the water's going to have to move, so I wanted them to be able to move if I had to. So I just used some really garbage tape and taped them gently in their place, and here is the whole environment coming together. Then the last thing to create before moving on to the characters is the boat. My main inspiration was just normal old rusty fishing boats because I thought it's a cool aesthetic that really fit the world, that it's all worn down and rusted, and that the deck is just cluttered with a bunch of tools and stuff. So I just finished a sketch and I started on the boat. I started off by just cutting out the main body. I wanted to make this boat a little bit 3D, so there would be a little platform that the character can move on. So this first piece is the front part of the boat and the front railing. And then on another piece will be the little cabin and another little platform. And then the last piece will be some more stuff in the background. So as you can see, I'm working on the second piece now. I decided that at first I would just cut out the basic building, the basic shape of everything, and then later on I could add all of the little details separately, like all the gears and all the other tools and materials that would be on it. I used some sketching paper to create rusted shapes on the bottom of the boat. I made a little ladder out of more cardstock. It was really hard to cut out because it was thin. I created some bundles of packaging and other kinds of tools, added some shading onto those with more paper, and just built everything up. And it was a quite enjoyable process. And then I thought about it and I was like, a fishing boat? He's not really a fisherman since he collects gears and scraps of metal, so I thought if he's coming out here to collect some gears, he needs a way to store them because they would slide around on deck. And I thought maybe he could have some poles attached to the deck of the boat sticking up, and then he could slide the gears onto them and stack them on the poles, and then they wouldn't slip around. And I was really proud of this idea because I thought it was creative and unique, and it kind of fit the world better than just a normal fishing boat. And then I realized that my animation that I created didn't quite line up with the proportions of this boat, so I had to create this extra little platform so when the cyborg lands it fits better. I added details like always, adding texture, layering paper to make it have more contrast and things like that. And you can see all of my little layers here that are going to go in the boat. Then I decided to make a few little stacks of gears already on the poles so that it would kind of imply what they are used for, and it would just look like he was going around for a while and he already found some stuff. And I didn't realize how weird gears kind of look from the side, so I struggled a little bit figuring out how to make them look like gears, but I think I did an okay job. Then I just glued them onto the poles that I thought they would look the best on, and then glued all of the layers together with a little strip of foam board in between. Alright, now it's time for the exciting part. First, I'm going to show you my little sketched out animation here. I try to make everything as smooth as I could now because then when I'm going to copy it, it just makes everything easier. I kind of gave up near the end because I just really wanted to start, so when the bird comes forward and snatches the guy, I didn't plan it out as well as I should have, and I think it affected it a little bit, but overall it still turned out good. To start the cyborg, I first had to measure how tall I wanted him, and then I took my time and I slowly and surely measured out every single part of him, the height of his head, the width of his head, the width of his body, his legs, the cape, everything, so then when I make all of these pieces individually, I can keep them the same size. I wanted to start with the head because I thought that would be the most difficult, so at first I drew out these little boxes and I was going to draw out every single face individually and then cut them out. And then I realized that these faces are not very consistent, and also that I need a lot of repeating faces, like lots of side profiles, lots of front view faces, so I decided to just cut a single one out and then use that one head to trace all of the others, and that way they would be consistent. And there were so many heads, I had to make a bunch of little baggies to be able to separate them and keep them organized. Then I repeat the same exact process with the body. I do front-facing body, side-facing 3/4, and then when the guy is like squatting down and when he gets picked up and bent, then I did the same exact thing as with the heads. And now it's time to put it all together. So I start in the very first frame where he's sitting down. I create the arms and legs separately because I thought it would just be easier, and I was really impatient. I didn't have the energy to just make a bunch of them. I wanted to see it all come together already. So I did the legs and the arms for him sitting, and then after I got the arms and legs on, I made the cape. I just kind of traced around the figure where I wanted the cape to go and then cut it out and glued it in its place. I also created a little hood that will come in front of the face just to like make it look better. And I repeated that process many times for all of the characters. I continued this process for a few weeks, cutting arms and legs, gluing everything together. I had to make sure that everything was the same size and the same shape, and just make sure it looked good and consistent all throughout. It was easy to do this in sections. I got all of my bodies for one section, got all the heads for that section, and then glued them all together and worked like that. I had a lot of fun with this part because it was really cool to see like all of the characters and how the animation looks. And since this took so long, it took like 3 weeks I think to finish all of these guys, I was struggling by the end of it. My arms were hurting so much because after I glued everything together, I had to cut little details and lines into the body and everything to add all the details in, so that was an extra step that I thought would just make it look a lot better. And I'm so happy with how all these guys turn out. Look at them, they're just so cool. I love these like little characters and like these little miniatures, and they're so cool. And then I was just so excited to finish it that I wanted to test out how it looked, so I just filmed a little animation on my cutting mat, and that's how it looked, and it looked amazing. So I was really excited to move on and finish. So in the main animation, I decided the cyborg would come into frame, hit a piece of junk, and then he would notice that, oh, there's a gear in the water, and he's gonna jump down and grab a net to go pull it in. But for now, I wasn't quite there yet. I had to create the gear that he was going to pull up out of the water, and then I thought it would be really cool to have him go like swing down on the pole to get down to the net instead of just the stairs, because I thought it would add more personality. So I had to create the poles bending as his weight is on it. And And then I also had to create the net as he picks it up, throws it, as it opens up, grabs the gear, and then gets pulled back. So that took another few days, and I really like how these look just on their own. They look kind of cool, but I created like 20 of these nets, all slightly different. And to keep track of all of these pieces, I placed them onto the cyborg character that they're going to be attached to. I wasn't quite sure exactly where the gear would be in relation to the boat in the final animation, so I didn't make the string attaching the two. I will do that as I'm filming. And very naively, I thought for some reason that this was the hardest part done, and then the bird will take me like 3 days and then I could post a video. But I don't know why I thought that, because the bird is like twice as big and twice as many frames as the character. But I thought I had the hardest part over with, and I was in for a nasty surprise because the bird took a solid 4 more months. And with everything else done now, I can move on to making the birds. I started off with high spirits, and I started on the bird and tree form, and then I will do him coming into the foreground later. But I thought it would be the easiest to start here because it's the most tree-like, you know, and I could work forward from here. I sketched out the shape of the bird, and I kind of try to make it look jagged and tree-like, but I also wanted to keep the bird shape, so it kind of looks like a bird. If you look closely, it kind of makes sense how it could become a bird. And I made these first like 5, 6, 7, I think like 8 birds, all look exactly like the trees, and I did them exactly like how I did the trees, with the shading and the line cutting and everything like that, so there's not much to say about this. I did make the eye opening by sketching it out rounder and rounder, you know, as an eye would. And the interesting part comes when I have to make the transition from tree to bird. I knew what the bird would look like as a bird, and I knew what it would look like as a tree, but that transition was a little bit difficult. I started off by making the tree birds look a little bit bigger and wider and have more like little feathery pieces coming out slowly and slowly, frame by frame. And then I also had the butt of the bird lift upwards, the beak come down, and this was a really cool and fun part of the project because it was something interesting to figure out. And as the bird gets fatter and fatter, you can see how it's coming together. I wanted to add lots and lots of details when it's in the foreground, but that also means I have to add lots of details in the background. But I didn't have to do as many because it is further away, so you can kind of get away with not showing as much. And again, I spent a couple weeks cutting out just the basic bird shapes, and there were about, I think, 40 frames of the bird from tree up until it leaves the frame to come into the foreground, so I had to cut out 40 different birds. And they also become bigger and bigger as it turns into a bird, so that was a little bit of a struggle with the cardstock. The paper size I had was 8.5 by 11, and the bird just barely fit. And that's kind of the only issue I had with this lightbox. I think the bird turned out just slightly too big, but I managed to make it work. And once the feathers started coming into play, I decided to shade each individual little section of each feather with a little tiny bit of cardstock. I want to say I regret it because it took so long, but I don't, because it just looked so good and it just added so much more to this whole project. It really made it look amazing, versus if I hadn't done this, then it wouldn't have looked as cool, and I think it was definitely worth it. Those extra 2 months of cutting the shading paid off. And I also liked the idea of there being like little dots of light on the feathers that kind of tied into the little like sparkles on the trees. So in these birds, I just poked those holes with my pin, and you can see I drew the circles where I would poke those holes, but I just basically poke holes on all of these. I shade all of the bodies like I did with the tree in the background. I leave the wings and legs for later because I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with them yet. See, this bird here was a little too big, so I had to use 2 separate pieces of cardstock to make it work. And here I have all of the birds for the background, and they look super cool. And after that, I move on to the big bird in the front. This part was quite overwhelming for quite a while because I just didn't know where to start. I thought the body would be probably the best way to start, so I kind of thought about where the tree cut the bird in half, and then from there back I could make the body, and then from the other side of the tree forward would be another piece. So I just started on the basic bird bodies. And I created so many of these bodies to account for every single little bit of movement of the bird, and honestly I didn't use any of it in the final project, so I could have saved like months of work with this. Same with all the legs that I create later. I only used like 5 of them, but I created like 50, so I really could have saved so much time, but I didn't know until I actually did it, so I guess this was all pointless, and it's quite sad, but I guess it is what it is. Next time I'll know better. But yeah, basically I just make a bunch of bodies. I add all of the details just the same as I did before, leaving out the wings because I wasn't quite sure how to do them yet. And here I'm testing out how big it will be, and here I thought it was going to be way too big, but I kind of worked with it, so it was fine. I go back to the previous birds and I add all of the leg details that I planned out in my sketch in the beginning, and I also work on the wings. I decided to cut all of the little feathers out and then cover it with tracing paper so it would look lighter, and I think that was a good call. It was better to make it lighter than darker, because it stood out more that way. I also cut some extra little details, cut along the lines, and yeah, just did a lot more of cutting. Same with the big bird, I'm going to do just the same with the tracing paper on the wings. And here is me cutting out all of the little pieces that cover the wings, and I will cut them down to kind of fit better later. And then I started to just cut tiny little lines into the feathers and cut around them. I ended up keeping the cutting around them, but I didn't do the little lines in the feather because it just didn't show that much, and it wasn't really worth the effort. But yeah, I still kept the cutting around each feather. I did that for all of the big birds. And then I was pretty happy with all the bodies, so I moved on to the foreground bird heads. I started with the bird coming into frame and just like doing the tiny parts of its face. I didn't end up using these because I could just use one where his face is already there and just not stick it in fully, so that was kind of pointless. Also, this neck piece was pointless because I made so many of these and I could have just used one of those. So all of this was pointless, but it was good practice, I guess. But anyways, I just created a bunch of heads, the same as I did with the body and the cyborg, just trying to do each of the frames, copying it over from my drawing tablet. Here I wanted to get the mouth to be just the right size for the cyborg to be swallowed up by it. And again, I tried to add lots of emotion and expression into the bird's face, and I really thought it could be cool to have the feathers fan out when he snatches the guy and then flatten down, you know, when he's moving, just to add some more movement and liveliness to it. And this is when I was starting to realize that this bird was going to take much longer than I thought it would, and it wasn't just gonna take a few days like I originally thought. So I buckled in and got to work and just did this all day and all night for the next week or more, probably more. On this part of the bird where it's in the foreground, I wanted to actually cut out the holes on the feathers, not just poke the hole, because it's closer, so they would be naturally bigger. And this was torturous, to say the least. I not fun at all. I actually, after this, I found a little hole punch that I could have used, but I didn't know it existed, so I didn't use it, and I just had to hand cut all of these. I wish I would have found out about that sooner, because I could have used it and it could have saved me a lot of time. Another change I added to the birds was on the eyes. I wanted to add more details on these eyes than the further ones because they were further, so you wouldn't see all the details. So for these eyes, I actually added a little extra detail, like a little ring around the eye with the Sharpie. Like on the eyelid, I would draw little lines with Sharpie, and then I'd flip it, glue it in place, and then it would look a little darker. And I thought that looked good, so I decided to do that to all of the feathers too. I did the shading like I did in the background, and then I drew the Sharpie lines on all of the feathers too, because why not? And I thought it would just look a lot cooler, and it really did. So again, another thing that was terrible but worthy. And here's how they both looked done, and I was like, oh, this looks amazing, I gotta keep this up, because I thought about stopping all the details, but I was like, I can't, it just looks so much better, so I continued. And then last but not least, I have to make the legs of the bird. So I did a little sketch to kind of figure out everything on the leg, and I already drew these onto the distant birds, but for the foreground birds, I had to create individual big legs because this bird is big. So I drew out all the legs, all the frames out of cardstock, but I also wanted it to stand out from the bird, so I layered this cardstock, doubled it up so it would be extra thick, so the legs would look darker. So I did that for every single leg. Luckily, a lot of this was simple. These parts where the bird is walking, of course the leg is above the water and you have to draw the feet, but for the majority of the bird, it's standing in the water, so it's just the legs coming down, and that's easy. So this only took a few days for everything. I drew and cut all of the same details as on the far legs into these ones. I actually thought about using that Sharpie to darken the details, but since I doubled up on the cardstock, it didn't really show that well, so it was pointless, so I thought I would cut into the paper instead of draw on top, and that worked a lot better. Overall, I really like the design of the legs and just the bird overall because I think it looks kind of wooden almost. Like, not really, but it's still believable that it could have been the tree that was in the background. So I have all of my legs, and then I go and cut the last little details onto the birds, like the mouth, and then the little face details. I do this for all of the close birds. Then I also cover the eye holes with tracing paper so they wouldn't be see-through. And here is my collection of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of birds and boats and cyborgs and just everything. And then I really took a whole day to just organize everything by type. I got all the tree birds, all of the in-between, all of the walking forward, and then the foreground, then all of it, the boat, everything. I organized it so that when I animated, I could make it as easy as possible. The legs had a back leg and a front leg, so I grouped them up together so I know what was for what, and I just really prepared. I got all of the nets, the poles, the cyborgs. I lined them up to make sure I had them in the correct order. I just did everything I possibly could to prepare. And here I am just showing off every little thing that I made because it's just so much, and I thought it would just be cool to show everything. And here's the environment as well, but now it is time to film. Alright, so I'm ready to record the stop motion animation portion of this project. I have my camera set up right here. I have the lightbox right here. Hold on. It's all set up nicely. All the layers are spaced. I have all the water layers that I can move around. I have the guy on the boat glued in place. The LEDs are on the wall in the back. And I'm going to attempt to get this done tonight. I probably won't, but you know, I've been working on this for so long, and actually I started trying to film this 2 nights ago, and I realized that I wasn't as prepared as I wanted to be, and I had to redo a bunch of things. I had to fix the box, fix all the layers. Things just weren't lining up, so I had to go and do that. But I'm pretty confident that tonight it will go smoothly, hopefully. If not, then I guess 4 times the charm, right? But I'm pretty confident it's gonna go decently tonight, so I'm gonna try to get as much done as I can, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so I reached my first major like screw up kind of. First of all, this post here that he's supposed to like go down on, I forgot to include it until this frame, so I think I'm just gonna edit it in later. Also, I forgot to film one of these little guys as he's standing up, so there's one missing frame and the pole is missing from like half the thing, but I don't think it's that huge of an issue. I think I can get away with it by, you know, adding in that pole, and then I don't think that missed frame will really matter. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Alright, so I'm on night 2 of recording because I didn't finish it all in one night. I pulled an all-nighter. I finished like 90%, well, not 90, like 80% of it. I have about like 30 pictures left to take, and let me show you where I'm at. It looks pretty good. I like how the bird's looking. It's a really big pain in the butt to get like the body and everything in there because, you know, it just knocks everything over and it's really annoying and frustrating, but I'm working on it slowly and surely, and it's going. It is looking really good in the camera, so that's good. Alright, this is it. I have one picture left to take. It's like so exciting, and it's really simple. It's just moving the water. So I'm gonna show you the last process. The last little bit of process. Boom. And then we take the picture. It's done. It's done. Oh my god. I just finished filming. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I pulled like 2 all-nighters for this. I'm so exhausted, but I'm so glad to be done. I'm really excited to see the results. I'm a little bit not worried. I know there's gonna be some mistakes. Like, I know that a couple times, because I did multiple sessions, the camera's gonna be slightly off, and then some other things, the movement might be a little bit like jittery because it was hard to like get everything lined up properly. So I think the movement's gonna be a little off, and then the camera work's gonna be a little weird, but I'm gonna try to fix as much of it as possible. And I'm gonna go transfer all the pictures, put it in my program, see how it looks, but I'm also going to add sound, music, all kinds of things to make it really immersive and cool looking. And then I gotta go in and edit out some of the like weird edges and like things, because I made a couple mistakes. So that's probably gonna take like 2 days, but I'm done with the thing, so this is exciting. All I have left is the editing, and then it'll be up. So Wish me luck, I hope it turned out well. And after all of that, I still wasn't done. I put all of the pictures into my editing program, and you can see that it looks cool, but it is incredibly choppy, and there are lots of tape pieces and just bits that don't look good in the whole thing. So I had to fix all of that. For the tape, I simply went in with my drawing program and just try to color pick and fix all of those tape parts. That ended up going really well in a lot of places, and I was really happy that I managed to do that. But again, that took many weeks and I got sick in the middle of it, so it was just a lot. And I went in, I added sound effects, I added everything, and it looks amazing. And here it all is. And I was just so beyond proud and happy with this project, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I know this video is kind of long, but if you stayed till the end, I'd really appreciate it, and please subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye!